The alien queen married her infertile daughter to a human and froze when she saw her grandchildren. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and mysteries. Among the stars, one of the most powerful and ancient species was the Virath. They were known for their incredible strength, unmatched intelligence, and the timeless wisdom passed down from generation to generation. Their empire stretched across multiple planets, and their technology was far beyond anything other species could imagine. At the heart of this empire was Queen Irelith, a being whose presence alone could command respect. She was the symbol of the Virath legacy, the living embodiment of their traditions, culture, and strength. Her bloodline had ruled for centuries, maintaining peace and order throughout the galaxy. But her family faced a deep sorrow that no one could have predicted. Her daughter, Princess Ilara, was born with a tragic flaw. Despite her beauty and intellect, Ilara was infertile. The Virath, who valued the continuation of their bloodline above all else, saw this as a curse. The royal bloodline had to continue, but how could that happen if Ilara could not bear an heir? Queen Irelith's heart ached for her daughter, but she knew the harsh truth. The Virath were a race of warriors and rulers, and without a true heir, the future of the Virath would be in jeopardy. Yet, Irelith loved her daughter dearly and would do anything to ensure her happiness. And so, she decided to make a choice that would change the course of the galaxy forever. The idea of a human marrying into the royal family was considered absurd. Humans were seen as primitive, with their short lifespans and lesser intelligence. They were not respected in the galactic community. But Queen Irelith, in her wisdom, saw potential in humanity that others did not. She knew that a union between her daughter and a human would break the rigid traditions of the Virath and perhaps pave the way for something new. Something that could change the galaxy. Jackson was a human from Earth, a planet on the outskirts of the Virath Empire. He was strong, determined, and had proven himself time and time again. He had come to the Virath home planet as part of a trade agreement, but his courage and resolve caught the attention of Princess Ilara. She saw in him not only strength, but something deeper, a kind of resilience that she admired. When Irelith arranged the marriage, the galaxy was stunned. The idea that the royal daughter of the Virath would marry a human was unthinkable. Ilara was not just the princess, she was the future of the Virath, and to many, her marriage to a human was a betrayal. The elites of the Virath were outraged, questioning the queen's decision. They whispered among themselves, doubting whether this union would weaken the royal family. Ilara, however, felt a sense of hope. Her whole life she had been told that she was incomplete, that her infertility made her less than a true Virath. But Jackson did not care about her inability to have children. He saw her for who she truly was, a woman of strength, courage, and intelligence. To him, she was perfect. The ceremony itself was a grand event, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Aliens from across the stars gathered to witness the marriage, some in support, but most in judgment. The palace was adorned with Virath symbols, towering statues, and flickering lights that reflected the Empire's immense power. Jackson, in his simple earth clothes, stood beside Princess Ilara, wearing a robe of royal blue. They were a stark contrast, her elegance and poise against his rugged, human demeanor. Yet there was an undeniable bond between them. The wedding vows were spoken in the ancient language of the Virath, a tongue that had not been heard by humans in millennia. Irelith's voice echoed through the grand hall, her words full of authority and command. But there was a softness in her eyes as she gazed at her daughter and the humans standing beside her. She had made this decision for a reason, and she hoped it would be the right one. As the ceremony ended, the guests were left to ponder the future of the Virath Empire. Would this union be a sign of strength or a signal of its eventual decline? Would the child of this union become the heir to the throne, or would they be forever seen as a mistake? In the months that followed, Ilara and Jackson settled into their new life. The royal palace was a place of both grandeur and isolation for the young couple. They were surrounded by luxury, yet they were cut off from the rest of the galaxy, shunned by some and admired by others. Ilara often found herself walking alone through the gardens of the palace, lost in thought. She was not used to being in the spotlight. She had always lived in the shadow of her mother, the queen, and now her marriage was the subject of galactic gossip. But Jackson was always there beside her, reminding her that she was not defined by her bloodline or her infertility. He saw her as she was, and that made all the difference. Their days were spent in quiet companionship, with Jackson teaching her about Earth, its cultures, and its people. Ilara, in turn, shared the ancient wisdom of the Virath, their philosophy, and their customs. It was a slow, steady growth of understanding and trust. But there was always the question that lingered in the back of their minds. Could they have children? Could the union of a human and a Virath produce an heir to carry on the royal line? The thought haunted Ilara, who longed for the family she could never have. And it haunted Jackson as well, who loved her deeply but feared that he would never be able to give her what she truly desired. One day, while walking through the royal gardens, Ilara stopped and gazed at the stars above. She had always loved looking at the sky, but now it seemed different. She could see the future stretching before her, a future full of uncertainty and potential. She turned to Jackson, who stood beside her, his eyes full of warmth and understanding. "I never thought this would happen," she said softly, "that I would be here with you on this planet living a life that is so different from what I imagined." Jackson smiled, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Life has a way of surprising us, Ilara. Sometimes the unexpected is the best thing that can happen." And in that moment, for the first time in a long while, Ilara felt a sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but with Jackson by her side, she knew they could face it together. The galaxy may have doubted their union, but in their hearts, they knew it was just the beginning of something much greater. What would happen next was unknown, but it was theirs to discover. Months had passed since Ilara and Jackson had married, and although the initial shock of their union had begun to fade, their life together was far from easy. The palace, grand as it was, had become a quiet, lonely place for the couple. The voices of judgment from those who had opposed the marriage still echoed in the halls of the royal home. There were whispers behind closed doors, doubts about whether a human could ever truly be accepted into the ancient Virath bloodline. Ilara had been raised to uphold the honor of the Virath, to carry their legacy and ensure that the royal family would continue for centuries to come. But now, in the face of her infertility, she felt like an outsider within her own world. She had never imagined that her life would take this turn, that she would marry a human and face the challenges of building a family that the galaxy might not fully accept. Despite the doubts that lingered in the corners of their minds, Ilara and Jackson found comfort in each other. Their marriage, once arranged out of necessity, had slowly blossomed into something more. There was a connection between them that neither had expected. Jackson, though human, had a strength and resolve that impressed even the most skeptical of the Virath. He was not just a foreigner in their world. He had become an integral part of Ilara's life, offering a kind of steadiness and loyalty she had never known. Each day they would spend time together, learning from one another. Jackson would tell her stories of Earth, of the simple joys and struggles that came with being human. He spoke of Earth's vibrant cultures, of how its people had found strength in their shared experiences despite their differences. His stories brought a warmth to Ilara's heart, a reminder that while she might not have the power of her ancestors, there was strength in the quiet moments, in the connections they shared. Ilara, in return, would teach Jackson about the Virath way of life. She would share stories from the royal archives, tales of the Virath's rise to power, their ancient wisdom, and their advanced technologies. The Virath had always been a race defined by their strength, their intellect, and their almost immortal lives. To Jackson, these stories were both awe-inspiring and humbling. He admired their culture and their history, but he also saw that there was more to the Virath than just power. They had emotions, fears, and desires just like anyone else. Despite their growing bond, there was a heavy weight that both Ilara and Jackson carried. The question of an heir of the Virath bloodline continuing hung over them like a shadow. Ilara's infertility had always been a source of pain for her, a flaw in her otherwise perfect existence. As much as she tried to ignore it, the thought of never having a child of her own, never passing on the legacy of the Virath, gnawed at her every day. One evening, as the two of them sat in the quiet of their chambers, Ilara turned to Jackson, her eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and longing. "I feel like I'm failing, Jackson. I was meant to carry on the bloodline, to lead our people. And yet I cannot even fulfill that most basic of duties. I can't help but feel like I am not enough." Jackson reached out and took her hand in his touch gentle but firm. "You are more than enough, Ilara. You've shown strength, grace, and wisdom in ways that many could never hope to. You've shown me more about what it means to lead than anyone ever could. And you're not alone in this. We are together in this always. Ilara sighed deeply, looking out of the window toward the distant stars. She had spent so many years being told what she was supposed to be, what was expected of her. It was hard to see a future that wasn't defined by the expectations of others. Yet Jackson's words gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps it was time to stop thinking only about what others wanted from her and instead think about what she wanted for herself, for them as a family. The days began to blur together in a comfortable routine. Ilara and Jackson would wake up early, spend the day in study and conversation, and take long walks in the palace gardens. They would share meals in the royal dining hall, though often alone, as most of the Virath nobility still refused to interact with them. But the quiet, private moments they shared were what mattered most. They had become each other's anchor, the one constant in a world that seemed to shift with every passing day. Despite their growing bond, the pressure to produce an heir weighed heavily on them both. Ilara had been to the royal doctors countless times, hoping for a miracle, hoping that something could be done to make her fertile. But each time the results were the same. There was no hope for her to have a child of her own. It was a cruel reminder of her place in the galaxy, of the expectations she had failed to meet. Jackson, ever the optimist, never gave up hope. He would hold her hand, telling her that there were other ways that they could build a family, even if it wasn't in the way the Virath had envisioned. Family is about more than blood, he would say. It's about love, trust, and loyalty, and we have that. We have everything we need. But despite his comforting words, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The Virath could not wait forever for a new ruler. Irelith, the queen, had made it clear that the royal line needed to continue. If Ilara could not bear an heir, the future of the Virath would be at risk. One day, while walking through the palace gardens, Ilara felt a strange sensation deep within her. It was subtle at first, a faint fluttering like something stirring in her chest. She stopped and pressed her hand to her heart, her mind racing with the possibility. Could it be? Could she be? She turned to Jackson, her voice shaking with excitement. Jackson, I think something is happening. I feel something. Could it be? Jackson's eyes widened as he stepped closer to her. Are you saying? Ilara nodded, her heart pounding. I don't know for sure, but I feel different. Maybe, just maybe. For the first time in months, Ilara allowed herself to hope. The possibility of having a child, of carrying on the Virath legacy, suddenly seemed within reach. But she knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, and obstacles to overcome. And yet, with Jackson by her side, she felt ready to face whatever the future held. As they walked back to the palace hand in hand, Ilara couldn't help but smile. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time it felt full of possibility. Weeks passed, and with each day the quiet excitement in Ilara's heart grew. She couldn't ignore the strange sensation inside her, the tiny flutter that seemed to grow stronger. But still, doubt lingered in the back of her mind. She had been to the royal doctors time and time again, and each time their reports were the same. There was no hope for her to have a child. So was this feeling just wishful thinking? Or could it really be the beginning of something she had longed for? One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm golden light over the palace gardens, Ilara sat in her favorite spot beneath the grand oak tree. The quiet hum of the palace around her felt peaceful, but her mind was anything but calm. Her thoughts swirled with confusion and hope, each one battling the other. Jackson approached quietly, as he always did, and sat beside her. He had become attuned to her moods, understanding when she needed space and when she needed comfort. Without a word, he placed his hand gently over hers, his touch grounding her. I think it might be real, Ilara said softly, her voice trembling with the weight of the moment. Jackson didn't need to ask what she meant. He had seen the changes in her, the way she had started to glow with a quiet excitement. He squeezed her hand, offering a reassuring smile. If anyone can make a miracle happen, it's you. The words were simple, but they carried with them the strength of his belief in her. It was one of the many things that made their bond so special. Jackson didn't just love Ilara, he believed in her with every part of himself. And though he didn't fully understand the intricacies of the Virath biology or their struggles, he knew the most important thing. Ilara was strong, and she would fight for what she wanted. The next day, Ilara went to see the royal physician. She had been avoiding it, terrified of hearing the same results. But now, the possibility of hope made her brave enough to face the truth. Jackson stayed by her side, as he always did, offering her his support. As they walked to the medical wing of the palace, her heart raced with both fear and excitement. The physician, a respected and experienced Virath doctor, had treated her with compassion during all her visits. Today, though, his demeanor was different. He seemed more hopeful than ever before, and that made Alara's heart skip a beat. He gestured for her to sit as he prepared his instruments, running a series of tests and scans on her. It felt like hours before the doctor returned, but when he did, his face held a mixture of astonishment and something else, something Alara couldn't quite place. He spoke carefully, as if he were unsure whether to believe what he had seen. "Princess Alara, I believe there is something I did not expect," he said, his voice measured. Alara's breath caught in her chest. "What do you mean?" The doctor paused, looking over his notes once more, his eyes wide in disbelief. "You're pregnant, Alara." The words hit her like a lightning bolt, and for a moment everything around her seemed to blur. She looked at Jackson, who had been standing quietly by her side, waiting for the news. His face was a mirror of her own shock and disbelief. I'm what?" she whispered, unable to fully comprehend the words. "You're pregnant," the doctor repeated, smiling in astonishment. "It's an early stage, but the tests are clear. The impossible has happened. You're carrying a child." Jackson's arms went around her before she could respond, pulling her close. "This is a miracle," he murmured, his voice filled with awe. Tears welled up in Alara's eyes as the gravity of the moment sank in. For so long, she had believed she would never have a family of her own. She had come to terms with the idea that she would never experience the joy of carrying a child, never have the opportunity to pass on the legacy of the Virath. But now, the dream she had quietly held in her heart for years was becoming a reality. The journey ahead would not be easy. Alara knew that. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope and possibility for her future. She wasn't just carrying a child, she was carrying the future of the Virath and humanity. In the days that followed, the palace buzzed with activity. Word of the miracle spread quickly through the royal court, and while some still doubted, most were filled with amazement and curiosity. The news of Alara's pregnancy was the first positive thing to happen in what felt like years of uncertainty. But even as Alara's excitement grew, there was a lingering fear. She had not expected this. She had never imagined that something like this could happen. What would the galaxy think of her child? Would they see the offspring of a human and a Virath as a threat, as something unnatural? Would they embrace the child, or would they condemn it before it even had the chance to live? Alara knew that the child she was carrying would be more than just a symbol of hope. It would represent a new era for the Virath, one that could either unite the galaxy or tear it apart. She had no idea what the future would hold, but she was determined to face it with strength and courage, just as she had always done. In the quiet of the palace, as the sun set on another peaceful evening, Alara and Jackson sat together, hand in hand. They didn't need to speak. Their presence was enough. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to face it together, no matter what it held. As Alara looked out over the horizon, her heart filled with a quiet hope. For the first time in years, she felt like she had a purpose beyond what was expected of her. She wasn't just the daughter of the queen. She wasn't just the princess with the broken bloodline. She was a mother, and with that, she had the power to change the course of history. The journey was just beginning, and though it would be full of challenges, Alara knew she was ready. With Jackson by her side and their child on the way, the impossible was no longer out of reach. The days turned into weeks, and Alara's pregnancy began to change everything. The quiet palace that had once felt so vast and empty now felt filled with energy, anticipation, and a new sense of purpose. Every corner of the royal estate seemed to hum with the excitement of what was to come. Yet, despite the celebrations and the hope that filled the air, there was still uncertainty. As the child grew within her, so did the pressure. Alara was no longer just the daughter of the Virath queen. She was now the bearer of the future. A future that had never seemed so fragile. The Virath people had always valued purity, tradition, and strength, traits that were now in question because of the child she was carrying. A child born of both human and Virath blood. The palace walls that had once been filled with the echoes of royalty now seemed colder, quieter. Whispers grew louder. Some spoke with admiration, others with disdain. Despite the miracle that Alara's pregnancy represented, there was fear among the Virath nobles. Would the child be strong enough? Would it carry the same power and legacy as the royal bloodline? Could a human-tainted heir ever lead their people? Ilara's mother, Queen Irelith, remained silent on the matter, her cold gaze often fixed on her daughter. Irelith, a woman who had seen thousands of years of rule and bloodshed, had never expected this. She had always planned for Ilara to marry a pure-blooded Virath to ensure that the bloodline would remain unbroken. But now, with a human as the father of the heir, the future of the Virath felt uncertain. She had never been a woman of doubt, but when she looked at her daughter's growing belly, she saw something that shook her to her core, the unknown. One day, Ilara stood before the grand window of the royal palace, gazing out at the endless expanse of stars. The sight of the galaxy, vast and unfathomable, always made her feel small, but today it made her feel as if the weight of the universe itself rested on her shoulders. Jackson, ever by her side, approached quietly. He knew what she was thinking, knew the burden she carried. They had spoken about the future countless times, but it seemed that the questions never stopped. "Do you ever wonder, Jackson?" Ilara asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. "Do you wonder what the galaxy will think of our child?" Jackson stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He could feel the tension radiating from her, the worry in her heart that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. "I don't think we can control how others see us, Ilara," he said, his voice steady. "What matters is what we see, what we believe in." Ilara turned to look at him, her blue eyes filled with uncertainty. "I want to believe that, I do, but there's so much at stake. The Virath are a proud people. Will they accept a child who is only half like them? What if? What if our child isn't strong enough? What if they never truly belong?" Jackson smiled softly, his gaze unwavering. "Ilara, you are strong, and your child will be strong too. This isn't about bloodlines or tradition. It's about who we are and what we choose to create together. No one else can define that." Ilara's heart swelled with emotion, and she found herself leaning into Jackson's embrace, feeling his warmth and comfort surround her. In that moment, the doubts that had clouded her mind seemed to fade, even if only for a while. With Jackson by her side, she knew they could face whatever came next. But the outside world was not as forgiving. As Ilara's pregnancy progressed, her visits to the royal council became more frequent. The council, made up of the most powerful Virath nobles, was a group that Ilara had always respected. Yet now, they seemed less welcoming. Their eyes, once full of reverence for the royal bloodline, now looked at her with skepticism, as if questioning her every move. Queen Irelith watched it all from her throne, her silence deafening. She said nothing, but her eyes were constantly fixed on her daughter, studying her as if trying to understand whether this child, this union, was a blessing or a curse. One day, as Ilara and Jackson entered the royal council chamber, the atmosphere felt colder than usual. The nobles, who had once regarded Jackson with disdain, now eyed him with something else, fear, perhaps, or suspicion. The human man who had married into the royal family and was the father of the heir was not someone they had ever expected to see among them. "Your Majesty," one of the council members, a particularly influential Virath noble, said with a bow. "We must discuss the future of the Virath. Your daughter's pregnancy is unprecedented, and while we all respect the Queen's decision, there are growing concerns among the people." Ilara's heart sank. The moment she had feared had arrived. She could feel Jackson's hand tighten around hers as the council member continued. "It is clear that your daughter's child will be powerful," the noble said, his eyes flicking to Ilara's growing belly. "But we must ask, is it truly Virath? Will it inherit the strength of our people, or will it be weaker?" The words stung, but Ilara refused to show her hurt. She had heard the whispers before, but hearing them spoken aloud in the royal chamber made them feel real, undeniable. She straightened her back, her posture reflecting the strength of her ancestors, the strength that had always been a part of her. "This child will be Virath," she said firmly, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "And it will be human, and that is enough. We do not need to define our future by blood alone. We define it by our choices, by who we are and what we stand for." Jackson, who had been standing silently by her side, nodded in agreement. "Our child will not be bound by the old ways. It will be something new. Something better." The room fell silent for a moment. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsettled by Ilara's words. The challenge to their centuries-old beliefs was evident, and they were unsure how to respond. But Queen Irelith, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke. "Enough," she said, her voice powerful and commanding. "Ilara is right. This child will lead us into a new era whether we are ready for it or not, and it will be strong. Stronger than any of us could have imagined." Her words echoed through the chamber, and for the first time in months, Ilara felt a sense of relief. Her mother, the queen, had spoken in support of her. The path ahead was still unclear, but for the first time the future felt a little less daunting. As they left the council chamber, Ilara looked at Jackson, a soft smile on her face. Maybe we are ready," she said quietly. Jackson smiled back, his eyes full of warmth and hope. "We've always been ready, Ilara. Together we can face anything." And as they walked hand in hand through the royal halls, for the first time in a long time, Ilara's truly believed that the future was theirs to shape. The days passed, and Ilara's pregnancy advanced. With every passing week, the palace seemed to change. The once stifling air of doubt and fear began to give way to something new, something the Virath had not felt in a long time: hope. But hope was not without its own complications. As the birth grew closer, the tensions within the palace and the Virath kingdom intensified. While Ilara had gained some support from the royal council, many still questioned the child's place in the galaxy. The Virath people had never seen a half-human heir before. What would the child be like? Would they be strong enough to carry on the Virath legacy? Would they even survive? Despite these questions, Ilara could feel the presence of her child growing stronger within her. At night, she would lay her hand gently over her belly, feeling the tiny movements that reassured her. For the first time in her life, she felt connected to something beyond the expectations of her royal lineage. This child, this tiny being, was hers and theirs, and no one could take that from her. Jackson stood by her through it all, offering unwavering support. He had always been her rock, but now, with the weight of the future on their shoulders, he was even more than that. He was her partner, her equal in every way. And though he did not fully understand the complexity of Virath politics or the galaxy's deep-rooted traditions, he knew that they had created something beautiful together. And that, he believed, was all that mattered. The palace had grown quieter in the days leading up to the birth. The whispers had slowed, the judgment from the nobles had subsided, but there was still an undercurrent of fear that Ilara could feel whenever she entered a room. The Virath people were not a race known for their acceptance of change. They were a proud, ancient species, and change often meant danger, uncertainty, and upheaval. But as the time for the birth drew near, a change began to take place, not just in Ilara, but in the hearts of those around her. The Virath had always prided themselves on their strength, on their ability to conquer and survive. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was time for them to consider that strength could come in many forms. The day of the birth arrived quietly. There were no grand announcements, no celebrations. It was a day like any other, except that it marked the beginning of a new chapter for Ilara and Jackson. They had prepared the royal chamber for the birth, but Ilara had insisted that it be kept as private as possible. She wanted this moment to be theirs without the eyes of the galaxy watching. Ilara lay in the bed, her body tired but filled with anticipation. Jackson was at her side, holding her hand, his voice soft as he spoke to her, trying to ease her anxiety. She had never been more nervous, but she also felt a deep sense of connection to the child she was about to bring into the world. This wasn't just about her legacy. It was about the future, about what kind of world they would create for their child. Hours passed, and the pain of labor came and went in waves. Ilara's breath came in sharp gasps as she focused on each contraction, each moment bringing her closer to the birth of her child. Jackson never left her side, his presence a steady comfort. He spoke to her softly, reminding her that she was strong, that they were doing this together. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the room was filled with the sound of a baby's first cry. Ilara's heart swelled with emotion, her body exhausted but filled with a sense of overwhelming love and relief. Jackson looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. He had never seen her so strong, so beautiful, and so full of life. The child was placed in Ilara's arms, and she gazed down at them with awe. The baby was small but strong, their tiny fists opening and closing as they took in their first breaths. The baby's eyes fluttered open, and Ilara smiled, her heart filling with an emotion she could not quite put into words. Jackson leaned down to kiss her forehead, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it," he whispered. "We made a future." Ilara nodded, her heart swelling. She had never felt more complete. This child, born of both her and Jackson's love, was the future of the V-Wrath and humanity. And as she looked at her newborn child, she realized that this was just the beginning. The future would be shaped by the choices they made together, by the love and strength they shared. As the days passed, word of the birth spread throughout the palace. The nobles, who had once been so skeptical, began to take notice. The child, though young, was already showing signs of the strength and intelligence that the V-Wrath prized so highly. They were born of both human and V-Wrath blood, and while some still questioned their place in the world, many began to see them as a symbol of what could be. The future was uncertain, but it was full of promise. Ilara and Jackson had created something that no one could take away, a new legacy, one that blended the best of both their worlds. Their child was not just an heir to the V-Wrath. They were a bridge between two worlds, two species, and a new chapter in the galaxy's history. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, and those who would seek to tear them down. But Ilara knew that they had created something worth fighting for. With Jackson by her side and their child at the heart of it all, she was ready to face whatever the future held. The galaxy would never be the same again.